I'm a photojournalist, really a photodocumentarian. I specialize in humanitarian issues, post-conflict, and so on. And I work mostly in Africa. I'm known as an African specialist, but I work almost everywhere in the world where there are issues and so on. I'm a UNICEF ambassador for photography, and most of my work is all about being able to trigger change for good. Whether it is an issue about human rights, whether it is an issue about what can we do to prevent future wars, or is it an issue about health and preventing HIV/AIDS and the spread of it. So the two stories I'm going to do a short, sharp synopsis about, and who commissioned the work to do it. One is called Fractured Lives, and it's all about the reconciliation of a very brutal war in Rwanda between the Hutu and the Tutsis, which was in 1994, and what is required for the healing and the trauma that is suffered. And the trauma is not just amongst those that are the survivors. Trauma is also about the perpetrator, their guilt if they've been incarcerated in jail, children that were born, children that are perpetrators' children, that have to live with the associated guilt and the stigma that's associated because their father or mother had committed these different atrocities. Rwanda is a very unique country. There's a population of 12 million. It is divided between Hutu and Tutsi. In Rwanda, when you go there today, we are Rwandese. We're not Hutu, we're not Tutsi. We are united. We are not a divided nation. But if you actually went back to the ethnicity, roughly 9 million of the 12 million population today is Hutu. So I wanted to start off a bit about the genocide and the genocide war. And I want to read from you, because this is just from some of my small diaries. I take very intense diaries wherever I am. And that from there is where I start to evolve and develop what my quotes are, what my narratives are. And this was from a perpetrator that was in jail. And I was interviewing him. And I said, well, how did this all happen in the beginning and when everyone was worked up? And he said, they gathered in teams on the football fields and went out hunting as kindred spirits. We were doing a job to order. Savagery took over the mind. We put off our good manners. In fact, we had no manners. The hunt was savage. The hunters were savages. Savagery took over the mind. We were blinded by the blood. We became ferocious species in a very barbaric world. And I asked the guy next to him. He said to me matter-of-factly, as with farm work, we waited for the right season. The right season occurred with the death of our president. It was the signal for the final chaos. But as with a harvest, the seed had already been planted. It was planned actually in 1959. The idea generated in 59. That's when we killed lots of Tutsis, and we weren't even punished. In fact, we were rewarded for those killings. Today, it's an easy thing for me to talk about. But yesterday, all we thought about were the killings and being rewarded for killings because it was the right season to harvest the Tutsi. So you can imagine that kind of mindset and so on. Probably the biggest and most challenging thing that Rwanda had to do after the genocide was unite a people. And if you think about the political stage today and the divisive and divisions that we have on the global stage in politics, which is actually almost a repeat in some ways of the way Hitler kind of burnished up that kind of hatred. How do you unite a nation that was so divided? How can you heal the wounds that people were feeling? International Alert is a peace-building organization that I do quite a bit of work for. And I've been there doing different stories. This story in the beginning was, what were their programs like? What kind of reconciliation programs that they do? And it is a kind of story that you tell, not just because it happened in Rwanda, but it is the repeat of how you make people that were inhuman, human again. It's all about being human. And those words are being used on a regular basis of the people, whether they were Hutu or Tutsi. What is human? How do you define human? And the people that I met, what is really interesting, the most important thing, and you raised it earlier in the conversation, is trust. Here I am, a Mzungu. It's an expression that's used in Africa for a white person. I'm definitely very white in a very black community. And I'm working throughout Rwanda, north, south, east, west, in some of the most remote areas. And the genocide is very fresh, particularly for those that had survived and where they've had families that had perished in the most awful. I mean, some of the stories I couldn't even write or put up in an exhibition because I had a solo show about fractured lives because they were too horrific for people to read. It would make them too uncomfortable to see some of the imagery and how people felt. And I felt the most important thing in constructing the story was to have something that was very balanced. I didn't just want to have the survivor story. I thought you also had to have the perpetrator story and those that have been able to reunite and come back. Because a lot of the perpetrators, when they tried to leave after the genocide, they went to the DR Congo, they went to Burundi, which is in a southern nation, to escape being prosecuted. But curiously, many came back because they were living in the worst conditions in camps, and their hearts and their souls were Burundis. They wanted to come back to their home. And the government had an amazing program for those that came back, even if they were spending time and incarcerated in jail. They had extreme counseling. After they were released, they were allowed to go back to their villages, and they were given counseling on how you have to go back to your village, how you have to ask for forgiveness for those that had suffered because of your killings and so on. We live in breaking news and celebrity culture. You know, what is so-and-so doing tomorrow? And they're more interested in someone's butt and who's had an affair with so-and-so. And sometimes we have to remind people about humanity. What is the impact of a war? What can we do to prevent war, more importantly than just to record what goes on in a war, and particularly a genocide, because what's happening in today's world, and particularly in Syria and what's going on in Burma and around the world, there is another kind of percolation of genocide. And so, have we learned any lessons? Well, that's for you guys to discuss after. So that's the Fractured Lives story that's up here. The other story here is I do a lot of work with the Elton John AIDS Foundation. The foundation is over 25 years old, and Elton John actually pays 100% of all overheads of everyone that works in that organization. So all money that is raised, and they raise this considerable amount of money, goes 100% to the programs that are in the field, which is essential. The commission for this story was to focus on what we call the young survivors, kids between the ages of 11 and 19 years old that are born with HIV. Why were they born with it? Because their mother never had the mother-to-child prevention medication, and about half of them, their mother never birthed in a hospital. They birthed at home. It's a very natural occurrence that occurs. And the kind of isolation that they experience, the kind of stigma that is associated is extraordinary. The Elton John AIDS programs are specifically designed to support these kids, where they are made safe places for them to go. Smaller groups are created for them to be able to feel comfortable to actually talk about, I'm HIV positive, and not be afraid or ashamed or hide it. About another half of them are all orphans. Their parents have died from HIV/AIDS without question. And the knowledge that they live in fear every day when they go to school, if they can go to school. You know, most of them are living within the poverty region that we can't even begin to experience. And just as a little bit of a background, I don't know if you know this, with HIV and being on the antiretroviral drugs requires a very, very strict regimen, depending on where their baseline is in the assessment. They have to take the drugs religiously. Like if they're taking it at 7 in the morning, they also have to take it at 7 at night. And sometimes the kids want to hide it if they're in school because they don't want other kids to know about it. And the biggest issue with many of them that are living in poverty is if you take the drugs on an empty stomach, it makes you really, really ill. And so a lot of them want to stop taking it. And the programs that are done for the Elton John AIDS Foundation is all about making sure the kids stay on the program. They have counselors that come and see them all the time, encourage them to be with it. At times, some of the programs, one in particular in Kasese, every Saturday they have a gathering where they come together and they do different things, and they get a good lunch, and they give them food in a sack to bring home for the week. So these are just two representations of some of the work that I do. I always think that I'm probably the most privileged person in the world because I can actually photograph where I have passions, and hopefully some of the stories that I do can help other people. And one particular story that I did do that's not up here is called The Red Badges of Courage, and it was about children that were forced to wear like an epaulette on their school uniforms that they were HIV positive in red. And this was a wide practice that was done in Tanzania. And we did the story, it ran in The Guardian, and we were actually able to change the policy that no longer exists. And for me, a lot of my work is really important that it educates, it illuminates what some of the crucial issues are, and hopefully can push change in an important way to make people's lives improved.